Music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Blunt Kelly get caught in the fake. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor pulls the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Steampunk Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
And that was our first, that's the introduction to the intro song. I didn't tell you this, Jason, but this was the first. We've had the intro song before, but not like with the little thing showing the words and everything. So anyway, that is our super cool song, written by the band AI. Which I guess it's not bad for an AI song.
It's not. It's pretty good.
It's kind of catchy. It took a few tries to get one that I liked, but okay. So today I'm really happy about this show. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Jason Darfus, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Is joining us. He is an immigration lawyer that specializes in among other what did you say? Defensive removals and asylum. Is that right?
Yes, removal defense, and I do a lot of asylum cases, both defensive in the immigration court and affirmative in the asylum office.
Okay, so that's actually a perfect response, because I don't think a lot of people realize that there are different types of asylum cases. Could you explain a little bit what the difference is between an affirmative asylum case and a defensive asylum case?
Sure. So affirmative asylum cases are filed by people who are not in removal proceedings, which typically are people that entered the country with a visa or humanitarian parole, usually through an airport, as opposed to the border. And then defensive asylum cases are filed by people who are in removal proceedings, which are mostly people that came across the border, although you can be in removal proceedings even if you came with a visa. So, and you overstayed your visa and then something happened and you were detained by immigration and put into proceedings, then you would file a defensive application. People that come across the border can also file an affirmative application if they're not in removal proceedings. So if they came across the border and did not have any contact with immigration, were never served with a notice to appear in immigration court, they can file their applications affirmatively as well.
So is the process for affirmative asylum different than the process for defensive asylum?
Yeah, so affirmative asylum is considered a better or a benefit over filing defensive, because when you file an affirmative application, you file with the asylum office. At the asylum office, it's not a judicial proceeding. There's no government attorney attacking your case. You appear for an interview with an asylum officer. It's kind of informal. You take your own interpreter. You just answer questions that, from my experience, usually the asylum officers are nice and respectful in those interviews. And it's kind of, it is a kind of nerve-wracking process for the applicant always, but it's a lot better than having to go in front of a judge and present in a very formal setting your case. And in the asylum office, they don't deny cases. They can't deny cases. They can only approve or refer the case to the immigration court. So that's the other reason why it's a benefit to file in the asylum office, because you get two chances. You get one chance in the asylum office, and if it's not approved there, you get another chance with the immigration judge.
So to get asylum, to get it approved, you see on TV a lot that like on the news, they'll talk about how they're coming over for a better life, and you'll hear this argument a lot from right wingers. Can you explain like what are the different qualifications to receive asylum, and like how this idea that like you can't like just coming over and saying, oh, I want a better life, and it's not like some asylum officer rubber stamps that, gives you a credit card and a free hotel room for life. Like, can you explain a little bit what you need to do, what you need to prove, what persecution means?
Yes, of course. So we can start with kind of dispelling the I don't know if you can describe it as misinformation, but how it seemed like Donald Trump during the campaign thought that asylum seekers were people seeking a mental asylum for mental issues.
There's that the Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. So I'm sure there are people with mental conditions that come across the border, as there are people with mental conditions in any population of people, but that's not what asylum is. It's not insane asylums. Asylum is a status for people who can show that they are refugees from their country of origin. So to show that, they would have to show that they have either suffered persecution in the past, or they have a well-founded fear of future persecution based on a protected ground, which are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or they can define a particular social group to which they belong. And on account of their membership in one of those protected grounds, they would suffer persecution either at the hands of the government in their country, or at the hands of a group in their country that the government cannot or is unwilling to control. So if they can establish that they're a refugee under that definition, then they can receive asylum in the United States.
So for those that like have not read much up on it, the social group status is something that's been particularly unique to this conversation the last couple of decades, because it has to do with, if I understand, if I'm misstating things, correct me, but as I understand things, the social group could include not belonging to a social group, where like some of the countries in Central America, for example, where they were being pressured to join gangs,
Mm-hmm.
and like their life they could be persecuted for not being part of a gang. Like Clinton and Obama and Bush and Biden all recognized that under the social group status, but Trump did not. And that previously that's always been subject to the interpretation of the president because of Chevron. But now that the Supreme Court has struck the legs out from Chevron, is that going to is that still going to be interpreted by the president? Or anyway, do you have just what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, so the definition of the way in which you define a social group, a particular social group, is one of the trickier parts of asylum. And many people think of it as a kind of a catch-all. If you don't fall under one of the other protected groups, than just define a social group, but it's very difficult to define a viable social group that will be accepted along the way. And judges vary, all the circuit courts vary on their definition on what's acceptable, even on a case-to-case basis. It can be different, and it can be very similar seeming circumstances in two cases, but the same court could decide two different ways on whether the social group was valid or not. So social groups have to be they have to meet three requirements. They have to be you have to define the social group as a group where all the members share an immutable characteristic, which means something that they can't change about themselves or something they shouldn't have to change. It has to be defined with a particularity. So it has to be relatively specific, and it's very difficult. Also, these three prongs they're often conflated, even among immigration judges. They're very difficult to separate and keep apart because they all kind of flow together and intermingle. So, and then the last one is that they have to be socially distinct within the society in question. And one of the social groups that is most approved in my experience, from what I've seen, is people that are of the LGBTQ community. That is a relatively easier case to prove social group viability, and than most other cases. Cases based on gang recruitment and like domestic violence, stuff like that. Those types of cases, for a while before Trump came in, they started to under litigation in federal courts, they started to become more accepted with their definitions of their social groups. But when Trump was in the first term, I think it was Attorney General Jeff Sessions who kind of commandeered a Board of Immigration Appeals decision and kind of made it out to restrict the possibility of viable social groups in those types of cases, gang-related cases and domestic violence-related cases. So since then, it's been more difficult. It's not impossible to get an asylum approval in those cases, but it's a lot more difficult.
Even under Biden?
Yeah, even under Biden, because that case was never I think parts of it were reversed, but not fully. I did not read that case for today.
Oh, no, that's...
But yeah, it's very difficult in those types of cases. And so what I've been seeing lately, since like 2021, 2022, many asylums based on political opinion, mostly from Venezuela. I do have a lot of clients from Central America who are mostly the kind of the gang type of cases or domestic violence type of cases. But back to the particular social groups, there is, if you want a better chance at getting an approval on a gang based asylum case, there has been more of a move towards accepting social groups based on family membership affecting your susceptibility of persecution. So like if you're a family member of a former gang member, then you probably have a higher chance than if you refuse gang recruitment or something like that. They're very difficult cases. I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing over here.
It just means you're good at your job. That's all. Now there's kind of what I consider a misconception that the asylum seekers are equated with illegal immigrants. And even like when you look at some of the way the news, like they'll lump border crossings and then illegal immigrants and asylum seekers and gotaways, and they'll kind of lump that all together. And they'll you know, like you just think there's 20 million people that are coming over here filing fake asylum claims and waiting 7 years for an asylum officer to hear their case or whatever. Could you like help us out and distinguish between those different things?
Yeah. So there are if we speak about all the asylum cases that are filed in a year, probably half of them are affirmative and half of them are defensive. So if we just generalize and say half of the defensive asylums are people that come across the border, then or half of all asylums are people that come across the border. I think most people think that someone coming across the border is illegal, or maybe at least people on the right side of the political spectrum believe that. But people who come to the border to apply for asylum, many of those people are presenting themselves directly to immigration, and they present themselves with border officials. And what the border officials want to know from them is if they fear returning to their country. And so if they express that they have a fear of returning to their country, then they are processed into the country. It can be into a like a detention facility temporarily, or it can be they can be released into the country if they have family or other people that they know that reside somewhere in the United States that are willing to accept them into their home. So if they're put into the detention facility, in many cases, they have what is called a credible fear interview, which is basically the same thing as an asylum interview. They go over all the same things. They get the details of why the person fears returning to the country. And then if they pass the asylum or the credible fear interview, they're permitted to enter the United States. And then they would still have to file an asylum application.
Who conducts that interview? Is it like somebody from Border Patrol or?
Those are. I'm in Ohio, so I don't handle that portion of the cases, but I believe that there are asylum officers that do that. Yeah.
So then they get released, and that's where you pick up with them. Is they have relatives in Ohio, and so they come to Ohio and.
Yeah, so there's a growing community of Venezuelans here in Ohio, and we've since I've been practicing for about 15 years, we've had a big community of Central Americans that I've been doing helping with their asylum cases. So yeah, I pick up from after they've been released from immigration at the border.
And so you said, based on what you said, then I would say it sounds like most of your cases are, like you said, from Argentina, right? And
Venezuela.
Or Venezuela. And then most of the ones from Venezuela are for political persecution?
Yes.
So then that's mostly what you're dealing with is political persecution?
Yes, for the Venezuelans, yes.
Okay, and then, so what does political persecution mean here?
So political persecution is where the government or government supporters in your country of origin pose a danger to you, to your safety, based on your political opinion. So you can have it's possible to be approved for political opinion based asylum without ever having actually been persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
But the stronger cases are where people have experienced persecution, like if they if they express political opinions by going to political events or rallies, marches, stuff like that. And then the government maybe attacked the rallies, or government supporters hunted them down at home, attacked them, beat them. I have had several clients that were actually tortured by the national police in Venezuela.
Oh,
People who were victims of what they call express kidnappings, um, and just all kinds of different things that happen to them. In Venezuela, there's a lot of country condition reports that indicate that political opponents of the government are disappeared, tortured, killed, imprisoned unjustly. And I think the most recent thing that Venezuela did um, was that they said anyone that has fled Venezuela is no longer a Venezuelan citizen, which just adds to that. So yeah, those cases are relatively strong in the asylum context.
you expect that to continue under Trump?
Well, he can't take away the right to asylum, but when he was in the first time, um, there was, I noticed with, first of all, with affirmative applications that there was a lot of resistance in immigration. I remember at one point in time, there's a filing deadline for asylum. It has to be filed within a year. And I remember, I think it was in late 2019, was it? Or yeah, somewhere around there, where the asylum office started rejecting applications if there was a blank that didn't contain either NA for not applicable or none. And that was not something that happened before that point in time. And so a lot of cases that were filed close to their deadlines, by the time they were processed and rejected, 2 or 3 months would go by, and we would be past the filing deadline
Wow.
on the cases. And it happened to many, many people across the country. And so,
I had talked to another immigration lawyer that was telling me about, he had one client that had like one child, and I think there's like 4 blanks for children, and they wrote the name of the first child in and left the other 3 blank.
Yeah.
And she got rejected because she didn't have NA written in the other 3 blanks.
Yeah, for years we could just leave those blank, and then all of a sudden, and we can now too. We can leave them now blank, because I think I don't remember if it was when exactly, but at some point in time, I think it was after Biden came into office, the asylum office or USCIS sent a notice out that if you were in the group of people that happened to, that they were going to accept your filing as on the day it was initially filed, and that if you didn't refile after that, you could refile. So they kind of corrected that once Biden got in.
No.
But that wasn't something that happened because of an official order or an executive order or anything like that. That was just like behind the scenes, resistance to people filing for asylum. The other thing that they did was to reduce, and this is still the case for affirmative asylums, to reduce the incentive to file asylum applications since they take several years because of the backlog. They put priorities in scheduling. So they try to schedule, and I think this happened also like in December 2019 that they announced that. They try to schedule the most recently filed cases for their interviews first. In those types of cases, the applicant can't apply for a work permit because their case gets to the interview, if it's referred to the immigration court or something like that, and they don't get it to 160 days before the decision on the case, then their asylum clock, which is what is called the asylum clock is a system where the days are counted once you file your asylum application. When it gets to 150 days, you can apply for your work permit, and when it gets to 180 days, they can approve your work permit. So the asylum clock will stop if you have a decision on your case. So if you have a decision and you need to appeal it and the asylum clock is stopped, appeals can take a couple years, and then you can't get a work permit if the asylum clock is stopped. So
that makes it, because then you've got to figure out how to survive while you're here without a job.
Yeah. So they did that in those cases to remove the incentive to apply for asylum, and that's still a thing, but it was kind of put on the back burner for a while when COVID hit. Once COVID hit, it's very seldom we get an interview scheduled for an affirmative case, like probably 2 per year. And I have hundreds of affirmative cases pending.
Wow. So, and that's the nice way, right? Like that's the good cop
way. That's in the affirmative. In the courts when Trump was in, they kind of put quotas on judges, and so each judge had to get through a certain number of cases in a specific period of time, and they were pressured heavily to do this. And so what happened was it was very difficult to get continuances in the court when we needed them, to ensure due process and everything. So it made everything a lot more difficult, especially if I had multiple hearings scheduled a week and little time to prepare for some of these hearings. It was very difficult and made things very stressful for attorneys and clients too.
So all of this, I assume, was meant to cut down on the number of successful applications.
Yes.
And then, like I remember a few years ago, during the first Trump administration, reading about how the percentage of successful applications had gone down a lot, and they were using this as proof that people had caught on to this, notion that all you had to do was come in and declare asylum, and and all of that. But like based on what you're saying, it would seem more like that is more just proof that they were successful in making it harder to get claims approved.
Yeah, little tweaks behind the scenes here and there made it more difficult. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what my question is here. Well, before we do that, we have somebody in our chat here on YouTube. His name's Neverfall Media. He's an avid viewer. How can someone here, I'll just post this up. How can someone say in this chat, get involved, assist, donate, or other? Is this something Rigo could help? He wants to know, how can he help with this issue? What would you say?
There are a lot of nonprofit immigrant groups that help immigrants file asylum in the immigration court, because there is a shortage in legal assistance for people, and the legal assistance that's available can be very expensive. I pride myself on being one of the attorneys that charges probably the lowest prices in town. But there are attorneys out there that will do cases. I'm hearing things between 10 and 20,000 for an asylum case, which is very difficult for a person to pay. So there are legal groups that assist asylum applicants free of charge. And I think Catholic Charities does it. And here in Ohio, in Columbus, there's one. They call it the Community and Refugee Immigration Services. They do it. There's other groups too, but they're all very busy. They're all very backed up, and I'm sure funds are welcome there, so they can hire more help.
Okay, so actually, this brings up a few things.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, you had mentioned a while back about the right to asylum, and for those that are not aware, I'm sure you're aware, but for those that aren't aware, asylum has been considered a right since basically after World War II, when Jews were trying to escape from Germany and they were being rejected in other countries, and so they were sent back to literally be murdered. And so after World War II, the UN, one of the first things they did was establish that asylum, the right to seek asylum, was a human right. But somebody can't just come into a country and say, I'm seeking asylum, and they automatically get it. How that asylum is determined is each nation has sovereignty over whether or not to grant asylum, but everybody that signed on has acknowledged it's a human right, and so that they will hear that that they have laws and everything. The U.S. has laws about asylum, and the U.S. recognizes it as a human right. Basically, it means you can't be forced to stay in a country that's going to kill you. So that's where I think one thing that gets interesting is, at what point are we not honoring our half on it being acknowledged as a human right? If we're there was one report I read during the Trump administration where a reporter went in and looked at 100 people that had their asylum cases rejected in Guatemala or something, and 30% of them were killed upon return. So, obviously those cases were pretty valid if they got killed the moment they got off the plane. Yeah. Do you feel like we're really honoring the right to asylum at this point?
I think there's a lot of inconsistency in how the asylum laws are implemented in the asylum cases, or how asylum cases are accepted. In the immigration court, I have seen cases where I have seen judges that approve 90% of the cases. I have seen judges that deny 90% of their cases. So that is a strong indication that it's not a consistently viewed. The laws regarding asylum are consistently implemented to each specific case. But I think one thing that I've seen in my practice over the years is that there are judges that think automatically that almost everyone is lying.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is making things up in their case. And any little inconsistency in testimony or errors, typographical errors, even in their documentation, serve the judge to find a negative credibility determination, and that affects many cases. So, and there's also in asylum, for asylum specifically, there's a discretion requirement. The immigration judge, in their discretion, even if someone proves all of the parts of their asylum claim, the immigration judge could deny it in their discretion. So usually there has to be some reasons to that. I mean, it can be based on even if the person doesn't have like criminal history that would make them ineligible for asylum, if they have like enough really bad traffic history or a few DUIs, they could be denied based on discretion. So, and for any other reason as well. But it's it's difficult to prepare people for their courts when the judges can be so different in how they go about the cases.
So and then so Neverfall had a couple of follow-up questions which tie into what you're talking about in a follow-up question of mine. He says, so like legal aid, is that resource that would be viable? And when I mentioned legal aid, I was referring to 501c3 NPO, just making sure nobody thought I meant any legal aid in general, just for clarification. And what I'd like to point out is that with asylum cases, unlike like criminal law,
Yeah.
you're not guaranteed a lawyer, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
And
Yeah.
so like a lot of people end up, even like minors don't get a lawyer necessarily, or an interpreter.
Right. Yeah. So I know. Well, first, for the question on legal aid, I think, for example, here in Ohio, I don't think the legal aid in Ohio handles immigration matters at all. So I don't think that is an option. There's a list of nonprofit groups nationwide that do asylums and removal cases. I can find the list and I can post it on Blue Sky or I'll send it to you and you could.
Yeah, I can. If you want to post it on Blue Sky, I'll make sure to put it on blast and let people know.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Another, connected to that, as I've done some studying on it, I've realized surprisingly that a lot of historically looks like a lot of the litigation has been funded by Christian groups, which I find ironic because the whole Christian right is immigration now. But if you look back through the, what is the Flores and all of that was all because of Christian groups, right? It used to be the biggest advocates for asylum seekers were the churches.
Yeah, it's confusing. It is. Yeah, it's very confusing. And that's a lot of the rhetoric during the campaign, anti-immigrant rhetoric coming from Christian groups was very confusing as well. And I just, it's very frustrating.
So the idea that somebody just has to come across the border and say that they're looking for a better life and they get asylum, that's not true.
So they do an initial, like a very brief initial interview when someone presents themselves at the border, and they ask like 5 or 6 questions, and one of them is, "Are you afraid to return to your country?" And if they say yes, then they can apply for asylum. But if they say no and they're asked, "What is your purpose for coming to the United States?" To work, then sometimes they're still admitted to the United States. But when they get into the United States and then later they apply for asylum, that always comes up in court. Why did you say that your purpose for coming to the United States was to work? So sometimes it can be difficult to get around that, but it usually hasn't been a problem. Yeah.
And and so I find it really interesting what you were saying about now it's not like they rotate the like I used to work in a little grocery store, and when we'd like restock the milk or whatever, we'd always put the new stuff in back so that the old stuff would get sold first. And it's interesting that they're just putting the new stuff in the front, and then the old stuff is pushed to the back, and then they complain that it takes us 7 years to
Yeah.
get asylum, when it's like they're the reasons that it takes 7 years. To, like this, like it shouldn't take 7 years. But do you think that the solution is more asylum judges, or at least a big part of it, or asylum officers?
Well, so I think a big part of the problem is at the border, because I think that there are a lot of people that are permitted to enter the country without really expressing a fear of returning. So, and then many of those people, when they're in the country, they apply for asylum because they have a right to, if they're here. But there are many cases. I think like only like 40% of all cases are approved. And there are many cases that are not approved that should be approved, but there are also many cases that have no chance of being approved. And if they did a better job at the border with those cases, then that would alleviate some of the problem. And for me personally, if I worked on the border, I would probably let everyone in. But it is a problem, because I'm a very empathetic person. But there is a problem with an overload of the asylum system and the immigration court system. More judges would definitely help the cases to move faster, but with a shortage in immigration and legal assistance for people, it's going to stress the attorneys.
So you're just moving the bottleneck, if you
in immigrant nonprofit groups. It would be very difficult. And it is hard for people to find immigration lawyers. In Ohio, they increased the judges. In Cleveland, Cleveland is where the immigration court is, that covers all of Ohio. And in Cleveland, up until the pandemic, we always had 3 judges since I began practicing. Now we have, I think, 12. And there aren't that many more immigration attorneys in the state than there were at that time. There's maybe double the number of immigration attorneys. I don't know specifically the number, but I have the feeling there's probably double the amount there was when I started. But there's 4 times as many immigration judges.
So you're in Cleveland. I got engaged in Cleveland.
Yeah.
I got engaged at Pier W. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Oh, no, I live in Columbus, but
in Columbus, okay.
I have to travel all the time to Cleveland for the court.
So Columbus is, I like Ohio State has a nice campus. I still have to laugh at them losing to Michigan, but no offense. So that's an interesting, like, I hadn't thought about that. Just having more asylum officers and judges doesn't help if you don't have more attorneys that can help the clients. And so it's like the whole system is the pipes are too narrow, so to speak.
Yeah, everyone is overloaded with work.
I don't know how much research you do on this, but I did some research on this, and actually, like, in terms of the number of refugees that America accepts, the U.S. accepts, or that the U.S. even has, it's kind of a pittance compared to what like Europe is going through, or some other countries. Like, we're talking about not even 1% of our population. They're talking in some countries like Lebanon, like 20%. is is overrun with refugees. So it's like I don't quite see the emergency that some
Mhm.
people like. Some I think we could use the people, and instead of that, we're talking about deporting them. Um, and like a lot of cases, deporting people that have been valuable assets to our economy for a decade, which
Yeah.
is the other half of what you do, right? With the defensive asylum, or
Yeah.
with defensive immigration. Is it what did you call it? Defense
Cancellation of removal.
cancellation.
So,
Okay.
so that's the other type of case that I've done a lot of in my practice. And I was explaining to you before how that type of relief is available for people who can show that they've been in the United States for at least 10 years. They have an immediate family member, like a child or a parent or a spouse, that's a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, and that person would experience a certain level of hardship were they not able to remain in the United States. So those cases are pretty difficult to win in themselves. Maybe they approve maybe 4 or 5% of all those cases. They're really for the extreme hardship cases
So
like
do you have like an illustrative case that you could share about?
um,
Uh,
well, the thing that I've had most success with in those cases are where one of the children suffers from a medical condition,
mm,
I've had many cases with people with kids with autism or Down syndrome. Those cases are generally approved easily. And then any kind of cases where where one of the kids has a IEP in school. It just depends on the reasons, but that generally makes for a stronger case. And then cases, of course, where the parent is ill, or maybe the other parent is ill. I had a case once where the other parent, they were separated. The other parent had some kind of drug problem, so they granted
mm.
so the father could stay in the
And then
country.
the kids are citizens; they're born here and everything.
Yeah, and so when it comes to the mass deportation thing, um, most of these people that I've worked with in those types of cases, what I've seen is that most of the time, the worst kind of criminal history that they have is maybe driving without a driver's license once or twice,
Hmm.
and they've paid taxes for years, um,
Hmm.
but they don't take out. I mean, they can get the child tax credit, but they don't take out of the tax system with other types of public benefits for themselves, at least um, during that time. So they're paying a lot in. And I think there's a misconception that immigrants come, don't pay any taxes, and get a lot of public assistance. But that hasn't been my experience. My experience is that many of these people are coming in and paying their taxes for many years and not taking anything out. They can't even get Social Security retirement when they retire. Um, and so it's kind of unfair to characterize them in that way.
Are they
And
voting?
no, I've never heard of someone voting. I've never heard of one of my clients voting. And
Don't tell Elon that. You'll get him very, very upset.
yeah. And the other thing that frustrates me is how, especially during the campaign, and I know it's a misinformation and manipulation campaign, but it frustrates me how they were claiming that there are so many violent criminals in the immigration system, and they were
Mhm.
pointing to the fact that there was like something like,
Oh, you're talking about the 13,000?
yeah, murderers, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when you look at the statistics, well, first of all, many of these people that have pending removal cases and violent crimes. Many of them are still serving their sentences in prison for
Yeah.
that sometimes are sentences for decades. Many of them entered when George Bush was president or when Donald Trump was president. Not saying they didn't enter when Joe Biden or Barack Obama were presidents, but these people, they're in pending removal proceedings because their cases um, are temporarily paused while they're serving their decades-long sentences. So over time, that's going to accumulate and make it seem like a large number of people are currently in removal proceedings. And maybe most people think if they're in removal proceedings right now, these are probably all cases from within a year or two, but these are cases from decades ago,
Yes.
So it's pretty frustrating.
And they're not in border control custody because they're in prison. Like,
exactly. Yeah. And so if you compare that to like statistics, crime statistics of US citizens or naturally born people, I think the number, I don't have the numbers here, but I read somewhere, and I'm just recalling what I read, that the number is actually a lot lower for violent crime among immigrants than US citizens.
yeah. There's like some, I don't think I've looked for and can't find national studies, but like there's a study in Texas that shows that, and you're like more likely to commit a crime if you're like a citizen than if, and it's obvious reasons for that. You have a lot more to lose if you're an illegal immigrant. You're trying to stay off the radar, not get on it.
Yeah, that's my experience too. Like most of my clients, I mean, I have seen people that are kind of careless here and there, but as you would with any people, but most of my clients are very cautious about what they do. Want to make sure they're doing everything right. I get text messages throughout the entire day. People ask me, "Is this okay?" Like I'm getting these text messages. They send me messages when they get scams all the time, and they just want to be careful about everything, which is understandable in their situation.
So if you could like wave a magic wand and fix the problem, you have like all the power to fix the problems, what would you do?
Let's see. I would. That's a difficult question because there are many problems. But for asylum specifically, I mean, I know that like when Biden came in office, they published their priorities for removal, which took away the prospect of being deported for millions of people. Basically, anyone that entered the country before November 1st, I think November 1st it was of 2020, was not a removal priority unless they had like some kind of gang ties or terrorism ties or really serious criminal history. That took a lot of stress off of me and probably many other attorneys that are worried about their clients being deported. So those people could still apply for asylum, but it was a much more relaxed process. I think if it's relaxed, it's better. Everyone is afraid right now about the talk about mass deportations. And even if mass deportations don't happen, we're at least going back to what was going on during the first Trump term. For asylum, I still think that they could do a better job of weeding out the absolutely non-viable cases in the border without taking away due process, because because if you come and you say that you fear returning to your country, you do have the due process. But maybe for the people that don't say they have a fear to return to the country, it would be maybe weed out those cases. I personally would have a hard time turning someone away when they're looking at you and they need help. But I think that if it is true that all of the people that are coming across the border are creating, employment or economic problems in the United States, and I don't know if it's true. I don't look a lot into those things. Then I think that they should look at maybe that on the border to weed out those non-cases.
And one other thing that I've been meaning to ask and keep forgetting, and I'm not sure how much you have to deal with it in Ohio, but there's been a lot of to do about Remain in Mexico and how Biden ending Remain in Mexico is why what is Remain in Mexico? Do you think it was good or bad? If so, why?
So I didn't deal a lot with it, but basically my understanding is that people that came to the border wanting to come in to apply for asylum, for a time they were given like court hearings at immigration courts on the border, and they would stay in Mexico, wherever. I think there were even camps or church communities that had places for people to stay. They would stay there, and then when it was their time for the hearing, they would go and present their case. And if they were granted asylum, they could come into the United States. And then I think what happened after they basically did away with that is they started the CBP-1 program, where people get to the border basically, and they're told to download an app, CBP-1. And then they kind of put their information in there, and eventually immigration allows them in. And it's a lot faster than Remain in Mexico. And you're not waiting for a hearing date. You're just waiting for them to say that you can come in, and then you come in. And
pre-screened based on the information that you put in on the app, so it kind of accelerates the process.
Yeah, I don't know the details of how it works or how it starts, but I know I have many clients that came with CBP-1, and the benefit to it is that most of these people can immediately apply for a work permit without waiting for their asylum case to be pending for 5 months. And because their CBP, when they enter through the CBP-1 program, they're given parole for a period of 2 years. And that is also considered a lawful admission. So someone that comes in through CBP-1 in parole, and they have a lawful admission, if during the time that their asylum is pending, if they fall in love and get married, they can apply through their marriage to a U.S. citizen for residency. So it's a added benefit.
So I think another word that confuses people is the word parole here. Like,
yeah.
Like out on parole, like you're a prisoner out on parole. It's not that kind of parole, right?
Right. Yeah. It's just a like a temporary step to get into the United States. You're in the United States on parole. So it doesn't have anything to do with crimes.
So this is like, and this is a lot of the like the Haitians, the famous Haitians that were in Springfield. They came over here through this kind of method, right? And that's why they're working in this factory and saving this town and getting accused of eating cats and dogs by JD Vance.
Yeah. So there was an influx of Haitian people coming across the border, like right around the time after they started CBP-1. So yeah, most of them probably came with that type of parole, and that probably confused JD Vance, and then he thought they were committing crimes and eating animals.
So I imagine a lot of things not involving catches confused JD Vance, but so all right. So here's the thing. Especially with guests that actually have careers and stuff, I at an hour. I try to keep it to an hour. But if they feel like they have the time, then like you're welcome to stay and talk more. But I don't want to keep you past an hour if you have pressing obligations, which is a feasible possibility considering somebody seems desperately to try to get a hold of you on the phone. So I don't know. Do you have more time or do you need to jet?
I could talk for a little bit more if you have a couple more important questions that you had or that I might be able to answer.
Well, if you're okay with it, there are if anybody else has questions from that are watching, you can see there goes that phone. I hope I'm not keeping somebody from like getting deported or something, or causing somebody to get deported. Oh, while I'm waiting to see if anybody answers that, you had mentioned you're an empathetic person, and do you like lose sleep over clients, like whether they're going to get deported or because there's like pretty heavy consequences, like actual lives are affected by your job. Does that ever keep you up at night?
Yes, it does. So in asylum law, there's a lot of little things, little details, a lot of legal standards that you have to meet to be approved for asylum. So for the affirmative cases, I'm not worried, but when I'm dealing with a defensive case, everything is on me and my client, of course. But when I say it's on me, I have to prepare my client. I'm the one that has to tell them what to get together for the evidence. I have to prepare their testimony. I have to make sure the translations make sense of their documents. I have to make sure there are no errors in the applications, and
Are you
that
bilingual or do you speak
Spanish. Spanish, yeah. Most of my clients are Spanish speaking, and so I have to make sure there are no inconsistencies in anything. I have to get everything to the court. The judge reads our stuff and shows up. The government attorney, they do a background check, reads our stuff and shows up, and then attacks our case. And when I make a mistake, if I make a mistake, then that can have an impact. And some judges understand little mistakes, and some judges don't, unfortunately. So it's been a 15-year learning process for me. But I try to do my best always, and I do when I have court coming up. I starting probably 4 or 5 days before the court, I can feel myself becoming tense, irritable. I feel worried about what's going to happen in the court. Even if it's a strong case or a weak case, it doesn't matter. My sleep is affected. I wake up earlier than I can. I have a hard time falling asleep. And that's even though we have to have everything prepared and sent to the court at least 15 days before the hearing. So everything's already done. It's just thinking about what is going to happen the day of the court.
Did I miss one thing?
Yeah. So I have checklists and everything that I try to follow.
What's your are there? You said there's like a U.S. attorney there.
Yeah, there's a attorney from the chief counsel's office for ICE, and they represent ICE and the removal proceedings, and then their job is to just attack our case. So
are there just like, are these people that you know personally? Like, are you dealing with the same couple of people all the time? Do you have a cordial relationship with them, or is it just like you wish you could meet them on the street someday on accident?
So I do know them. Every once in a while they get someone new in their office up in Cleveland. But I do know all of them. I've worked with them many times. I've spoken with them on the phone outside of court. I don't know them personally, but out there, and they vary. All of them are professional, but some are very, very nice.
Mhm.
Some will be, you know, will allow things to move forward without a fight. Without much of a fight, they'll just be very lenient. Others really like to attack, and sometimes, from what I've seen, it's kind of in an unfair way. Like, for example, they can jump on. I've seen cases where uh, those attorneys will jump on typographical errors and try to make a problem out of nothing. And in other instances, and sometimes it's just coming from um, you know uh, their desire to win, even though they know that it wasn't something material in the case.
Mhm.
So,
So
but most of them are nice, I would
they're
say.
just decent people doing their jobs. They're not vindictive, mean, racist,
No,
anti-immigrant.
no, and even in the cases where I thought that they treated us unfairly, in a specific case, I think whatever attorneys have done that in the past, like, they move on, next case, completely different case. So I've never seen them like be vindictive with me based on previous cases or anything like that.
Do you ever have a sense that judges are politically motivated? Or will you get yourself in trouble if you answer that? Don't get yourself in trouble.
Well, um, I I have not been able to guess, or I have not been able to convince myself of a specific judge's political leanings. Um, I would like to think that the judges that don't approve many cases are probably not of the same political mindset that I am, but I don't know that for sure.
So you haven't had a judge come in wearing a MAGA hat or anything.
No.
That would probably be bad news, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, I haven't seen any other questions pop up on the screen here. So just once again, I really appreciate you coming on. This is, I think you've cleared up a lot of misconceptions that people have. And, I really wish there would be more actual discussion about the asylum process rather than just these sweeping assertions that there's 20 million people here requesting asylum because there's loopholes or whatever, and it's like
Yeah.
there's just a whole lot of nonsense behind all that, and I think you really helped clear up a lot of it. So
Okay.
appreciate you taking time out of what is obviously a very busy day to come in and address those things.
No problem.
All right, thanks, Jason.
Thank you.